When I was starting out, the popular theory said it was their mom and dad that screwed a person up. But if you really want to screw someone up, I say, send them to high school.
So since I've been on my Silent Hill wave, I finished playing Silent Hill 1 for the PlayStation 1. It's a very interesting game. It hasn't aged that well, of course. The graphics are pretty bad, polygonish and stuff. But once you start playing it, you get used to that. So that's not that much of a problem. At least it wasn't for me. And it surprised me because in most cases, actually, such old games don't manage to work for me simply because of the atrocious graphics. But this game is actually one of those games that has the right environments and the right ambience and everything. Just the atmospheric setting of the city and everything managed to distract me from the bad graphics. But as always, I'm gonna start with the bad sides of it, because this game, while being a cult classic, at the same time does have its weaknesses. And one of the biggest weaknesses of the game is the horrible camera. Most of the time, and that is partially intentionally, you will not be able to see what's straight ahead of you. And that really sucks. The game, they intentionally do this because they want you to get scared. They know you can hear there's a monster, the monster's coming at you, and you have no visibility. So you can only react either by shooting blindly in the direction of which you hear the monster, which is usually a bad idea because you have limited ammo, or swing your weapon blindly like a dumbass, or you can go closer and potentially get hit. In any case, it's just bad design for me, and it's cheap. You shouldn't try to create fear by limiting basic abilities of a character, the basic mechanics of the game, namely being able to see a meter in front. Now, the second thing that I don't like is the fact that we have tank controls. Some people say, yeah, tank controls are intentionate, they limit the player in order to make the game more scary, etc, etc. Well, again, you should not use this kind of basic mechanics to create fear. Fear is not created through this. I mean, it is the only thing that you're doing is you're frustrating the player. You feel like it's unfair. If I have to take time to turn the character around and then run, or I have to adjust him perfectly to get inside a room instead of being able to control him normally, all of this is just really bad, and I don't think it's scary. I don't think it's effective. I think it's just made to annoy, and that's just not good game design. That's how I see it. The next point is that since it's a PlayStation 1 game, you actually must use the D-pad on your controller. You can't use the analog sticks. I mean, you could use one of the sticks first of all, but the character moves very weirdly because of tank controls, and it ends up being a mess, and it will get you more in trouble more than anything. So the D-pad is the way to go, and that's, well, I mean, I understand that there were limitations back then if you consider that the analog controls actually came up later on the PlayStation 1s. The first gamepads that came out with the PlayStation 1 didn't have any. That was something that came up later. So I understand it, but it is still a negative thing. Then another thing is that the game, all in all, is very old school. This game was basically trying to some extent copy Resident Evil's success, so they took a lot of inspirations from it, from the first Resident Evil games. And while Silent Hill, in my personal opinion, is a much better game overall than, for example, Resident Evil 1, it still took over some of the greatest weaknesses of this franchise. For example, back in the old days, you had to say that you want to pick up everything that you actually want to pick up. And it's the same here. You find a healing item, it asks you, do you want to pick up healing item? You have to click yes. And then, you need to turn a valve, it asks you, do you want to turn the valve? You have to click yes. And these are things that you have no other choice with the valve, for example. Parts of the game that a door will only open if you press something, for example. Well, you have no choice. You have to do this. And the worst part is, again, with the health pickups and stuff like that, this all just takes you out of the game and stops the game for a second, and it's just bad practice. Of course, nowadays they have changed that, so now you just pick up stuff automatically as soon as good stuff. Actually, I think you pick up everything automatically. It doesn't ask you, do you want to pick it up, unless there's some kind of serious consequence related to it. Now, the next point is that the game likes to tease you with weapons you cannot have in the first playthrough. For example, the drill. There's a drill weapon which you can get in the second playthrough. At some part of the game, there will be fuel for it. You can pick that fuel up, and then you can pick up the drill and use it as a weapon. Now, in the first playthrough, there will nowhere be fuel for it, so you have no gasoline to power the drill. You see the drill, it's there, and the game is like, if you try to pick it up, it says, oh, I need gasoline. There's no gasoline. And this is bad because it could create, and I'm sure it did, confusion for players who are uninformed about this, and they might actually go out there and start to look for fuel. Instead, just don't make it appear at all, because they will be wasting potentially minutes to hours in looking for this thing, and that's not good game design. You don't want to do that. Just don't inform the player. Just, don't put it at all in the first playthrough if I can't have it. It doesn't do me any good seeds there if I can't pick it up. Now, the next point is the PlayStation 1 graphics. I did mention that I did get over them pretty fast because of the atmospheric game and the city and everything and the mist. The whole thing works well, and the fog, covers a lot of it. And while the whole game is very pixelated and stuff, the eye adjusts to that. And after playing for an hour or two, it doesn't disturb you that much. At least that's how it was for me, and I was actually quite surprised to see how easily I could accept that. Whereas with other games that are not necessarily old, though I can't, but of course that may be also because you end up accepting that this was the time and people couldn't do any better. For example, if a game comes out now with terrible graphics, I know they can do better, so I'm not willing to compromise as much. Another thing that I hated were some frustrating enemies, and that's something we see in almost every Silent Hill game, obviously starting with 1. Right at the start of the game, you have these flying enemies. These things are faster than you, they can gain on you. Even with the handgun, because you can't lock on to enemies, your character ends up shooting and you just spray and spray, It doesn't work. Sometimes you just waste a bunch of ammo. Another thing is that when you injure these flying bastards, they will actually fly away, and if you're close to one of those ends of the map where the enemy basically can go beyond the end of the map, you cannot chase him. And when he returns, it's like he's at full health. I just pumped him up with 3 bullets. Usually it would take 4 for him to drop down and I can start stepping on him. But in this case, I need to shoot him 4 more times again, and I am certain it's the same enemy because one asshole did this 3 times in a row with me, and it was always just him. And once I killed him, nothing else came. So it was definitely just him. So frustrating enemies, very annoying. The next point that I hated about the game is that the shooting is generally pretty bad. You just never feel like you're gonna connect with a shot. It feels like you're throwing dice there. Of course, if the enemy is straight ahead of you and is not too far, it works, but all in all, it just felt weird. And the last negative point I want to address for Silent Hill 1 is that the bosses were very uninspired and dull. You're mostly fighting bosses that are more fit for Resident Evil than Silent Hill. They're just some kind of overgrown animals of sorts or something like that. You fight a giant worm, you fight a giant moth, you know what I mean? Most of the bosses, from Silent Hill, I expect disturbing imagery and weird bosses that look like weird stuff, and that, giant moth is not weird, I guess. If you inform yourself, you'll know that prehistorically, we on this planet, most of the bugs were giant at first. So that's not very inspiring. I don't know. I feel like it should be some kind of a grotesque monster that I'm fighting, and that wasn't the case with most of the bosses. So that was a bit disappointing. Now the good parts of the game are that the story is quite interesting, although convoluted. It's definitely something you need to play if you're interested in playing the Silent Hill games and you want to understand more about the lore, and I personally value story over everything, so that was also the main motivation for me to play this game. The game can be very creepy at times actually, and the bad graphics can actually contribute to that. The game rewards exploration with items, but the exploration can be dangerous, so if you walk around looking for stuff, you're actually gonna find good stuff, but it could be that it ended up costing you more health potions and ammo than you actually are gonna gain at the end of the exploration. So it is a thing that you have to consider. Are you gonna risk it or not? It is very weird and crazy in many ways. Stuff happens, there's some sequences. It has several endings, so you're motivated to replay it, and you have replaying rewards, which means that after you replay it, you get new weapons, etc., which is a pretty good thing. That is something that I actually do approve of and I like to see in these games. But you gotta consider that I played this on my PlayStation 3 using emulation, and I had the problem that I had no voice acting, for example, but I could still read the dialogue, so that was okay. Now the next game that I'm gonna compare this one to is Shattered Memories. So Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a game which is made by a US studio, and they actually aimed to reinvent the story of the first game. So the US guys, they do not like the cult, and they tried to reinvent Silent Hill 1 with the same characters, but the story being completely different, or almost completely different. In both games, you are Harry Mason, and you're looking for your daughter Cheryl, and in both games, that's pretty much the only thing that you meet. You meet other characters that have the same names, but they are almost completely different characters and they behave in a different way. Now, it's interesting because it is a completely different angle on a classic game, and I personally agree with the American studio that the cult is, for me personally, not as good. My biggest, the best game from the Silent Hill series, in my personal opinion, is actually Silent Hill 2, where there is no cult and the story is very interesting and specific to that game, reminding me, for example, the Final Fantasy games, where most games are actually individual and have their own storyline. And they did something like that here with Shattered Memories. And Shattered Memories is, while being an extremely different game, it is very similar in some aspects and interesting for its own. But I'm going to start with the negatives here. And the first and worst negative thing here is that we have lots of quick time events. I hate them. Now we have to consider that Shattered Memories was designed primarily for the Wii at first. So there are a lot of these, grab something by moving it and stuff like that. Now on the PlayStation, this was the PlayStation 2 version that I played. I played it again, emulating it on my PlayStation 3. It doesn't translate very well on a gamepad because you end up just moving the analog sticks to create it. It works, but it's boring. And since they were afraid that this kind of controls can be really clunky at times, they made the game really easy to begin with. So you have a lot of quick time events again because on the Wii you would move like a dumbass, your hands flapping around and stuff. And there's a lot of that in this game, and I hate quick time events, and I think most people do. Some quick time events are okay for me, but the ones where you need to press a button, for example, mash the X button to do something, that's absolutely uncool for me, and I feel like I'm damaging my gamepad by just pressing like a moron to do something extremely simple. Another thing is that the maps are really small because the game is segmented into smaller maps, but oftentimes they actually branch out, and there's a very high possibility that the map's gonna make you run in circles. And this happened several times where I spent 15 minutes going and suddenly I figure out that I'm right at where I started, and it's annoying and it's insulting too, because you think to yourself, the map is so small, how did it cheat me into going all the way back? But it does it in a very smart way. You go somewhere, it shows you a new place, and then you go into that new place, and suddenly, for example, you're higher and there's a place where you can jump down, and if you jump down you can't climb up anymore, and you suddenly realize you've jumped down to a place that only leads back to the beginning of the map, something like that. So that is very annoying. It feels like they just stretch the time it will take you. So it's not that big a deal, but it's annoying, and everything in a game that annoys me pulls me out of the experience, and therefore is really bad for me. Now, another thing that is bad is that this game is not creepy at all. There's absolutely no combat in this game. You have the normal world and the nightmare world. In the normal world, it's just exploration. You walk around, you see a locked door, you know that you need a key. That means the key is going to be in the same room or extremely close. In any case, there's no thinking here, there are no puzzles here in the normal world. It's just exploration. Imagine Dear Esther in the shape of Silent Hill, or Journey and stuff. And for me, those are actually bad games. They're not even games for me. Some people think that they're awesome. They're like, oh my god, Journey, the best game ever. I think it's nonsense and it's stupid. That's my opinion. So the game's not creepy in the first part, where you're basically just exploring. In the second part, where you're actually having a running sequence and you just try to rush through the map and reach the proper place, it's not scary. It can be very frustrating, especially later, but it will not really scare you. It's just, pressuring you. That to me is bad design, especially because since the limitations of the Wii and stuff, graphically it doesn't look good at all there. The colors are stupid, and the whole thing of running and then pressing, of course, quick time events when the enemies grab you, because what the enemy does is they hug you to death. They don't hit you, they don't do anything, they just jump on you and cling on to you, and sometimes you can have like 2-3 jump on you and then you die, basically you just slowly fall to the ground. They keep you hugged, that's it. They just hug you to death, and they don't choke you by the neck or something, they just hug you. That's just stupid, but okay, that's the game, and I didn't like that. Now the next point is that you have to collect these things called mementos, and they're just random stuff that's lying around you pick up in the normal world, and the mementos are useless. They don't convey any information. They're just useful in determining which ending you're gonna get. So you need certain mementos to get certain endings, and that's pretty much it. The game actually in its own is pretty cool. It does have great voice acting. That's something that I enjoyed. It does have lots of adult characters that you meet. So unlike many Silent Hill games, you don't feel so alone and so abandoned. You're almost constantly in contact with other characters. So while it feels like the genre has been changed completely here, for me personally, I enjoyed that. And the plot is interesting, although convoluted, but again, they managed to make it very interesting. There is no cult here, so I like that, because I don't like the cult plots at all. The protagonist is complex. He's not like the one in other games, or for example in Silent Hill 1, he shows more emotion here. He shows more dedication as well, although that can be argued. I mean, in Silent Hill 1, he's really trying to find Cheryl at all costs, but I like him. Personally, I like him. He seems more social. You can also determine certain things, certain behaviors of your character, like you can make him a womanizer, for example. And that entertained me because there are these parts of the game. You even can have sex in this game. So, it's just different. It feels like not so much a Silent Hill game most of the time, but it is something very close to it. Another thing is that you have a cell phone here, and they have placed phone numbers all over the city on billboards and stuff. You can call all these numbers and you get different audio logs, you get clues for puzzles. So it's very, very interesting, although very limiting. Essentially, it's just how the story is being told. It serves exposition, but it is entertaining. I found that to be curious, so that's a thing. The fact that there's no combat here can be actually a pretty good thing. Most of the Silent Hill games have very bad combat, so for me, after having played Silent Hill 1, playing this game without combat and not worrying that I might die any moment and stuff, that was very refreshing. So I actually enjoyed that and welcomed it. Another thing that I liked is that most characters are female and they're all very weird and sexual. Harry has lost most of his memory, so he can't tell what's happening. He constantly meets different women. He sees them die, then they're alive again. So, it's all very interesting, and they behave completely out of context and oftentimes just show serious interest in Harry, which even he can't fathom, and that kind of triggers his alarm bells to be careful, because you know how it is if suddenly a hot woman shows extreme desire for sex for no reason, and then another one does it, and then another one does it. You're gonna think it's awesome, but you're also gonna think something's not right here, something's happening, I gotta be careful. This is not normal. That's how Harry is feeling, and you can really see it, and the voice acting conveys that very well. And this is finally a Silent Hill game where the character gets some. I think that's pretty cool. Oftentimes in Silent Hill, you are confronted with two themes, sex and death. That's the thing that the Silent Hill games are about. But in terms of sex, you often see monsters raping other monsters, how it was with Pyramid Head, for example. You don't actually see your character getting any, but he gets a lot of the death part. So I think it's only fair he gets to have sex as well. Then the last positive thing I want to address here is that I really enjoyed the ending. It's a twist ending, and most of you will have it spoiled before, but even if, you're still gonna like it because the voice acting and the way it's done is just very, very good. It works very well. Now, if we put these two games next to each other, they are supposed to be essentially very similar games. They're supposed to tell the same story, but the Shattered Memory story is called a reimagining, which is just a different way of saying, hey, we took this game you all like and we made it completely different, but it's kind of having the same guys. Just for a comparison, in Silent Hill 1, Dahlia Gillespie is an old woman and you really don't like her. You want to kill her at some point. And in Silent Hill Shattered Memory, she's a hot young chick with which not only do you have a relationship, but she's helping you and stuff. While in one, she's mostly doing damage to you. So, it's very different. Also, what I did like about this game is that depending on how you behave and what choices you take in the psychological tests that you have, because the game also has this part where you are kind of in front of a psychiatrist and he constantly asks you to do different tasks. Depending on these things, the characters you meet and everything will actually look different and behave differently. In my case, the policewoman was actually super slutty with nice hair and huge boobs which were kind of going out, and if you play it differently, she's actually going to be dressed like very professionally, and you're not going to have these big boobs and stuff like that. So the game adapts to the way you play it and is showing you different things. So it has a lot of replayability value if you want to see all these characters in their different ways, or if you're like me, you're just going to check it out on YouTube because you kind of don't want to play it again. But in any case, I think that both games have their worth and they should definitely be played, especially one though, because one actually tells you the canonical story. So if you're interested in the Silent Hill 1 story and you want to actually experience Silent Hill the way it is meant to be, where you have a scary game with pressure and terrible controls and bad combat, this is the game you definitely should be playing. If you want to play a carefree game where dying is pretty much almost not possible, and essentially the game is quite easy, tells a story of its own, and it is interesting still, but it's not the first part as it's supposed to be, then go for Shattered Memories or play both. You're not gonna regret it one way or the other, although a lot more people dislike Shattered Memories than people dislike the first game, simply because they're a bit biased. I was biased too, but I'm more objective about this, I think. So in any case, thanks for watching this review. Take a look at the other games that I have reviewed. There are also a bunch of Silent Hill games that are in there, and have a great day.